Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today we're going to look at one of the worst mining incidents in Turkish history. One of the things that I like about doing these videos is that I get to hear about disturbing stories that I probably wouldn't have encountered otherwise. So I do want to say a huge thank you to F.A. Idol. He's a big Turkish YouTuber who put me onto this story. I'll put a link to his channel in the description of the video, and thank you very much for the suggestion. This is the story of the Soma mining disaster. So here's something I never knew. The safety of coal mines is measured by how many deaths occur for every million tons of coal extracted. For example, according to a 2010 report, in the USA there's around 0.02 deaths per 1 million tons of coal that's mined. In China, where the working conditions are slightly worse, their rate is around 1.27 deaths per million tons of coal. In Turkey, however, they have just over 7 fatalities per million tons of coal. This makes Turkey's coal mines the deadliest in the world. The poor safety record of Turkey's mines has always been a major issue in the country. The Ende coal mine, also known as the Soma mine, located in Manisa province, is well known by the locals for its terrible working conditions. It used to be a state-owned mine, but in 2005 it was sold to a private company. When the sale happened, many of the miners working there hoped that they would get improved working conditions, but things actually seemed to get a lot worse. With privatization, the miners lost their status as state employees and instead they became contracted labourers. It also meant that there was a lot of cost-cutting measures put in place, which meant cutting crucial safety measures and any benefits that the miners had previously enjoyed. With these changes in place, the mine was able to produce coal much more cheaply. There was also a massive push for increased output, and this led to a relentless pace of work, leaving miners exhausted and overworked. As one miner put it, "We now produce the same amount of coal in 3 to 5 years that we used to produce in 10. As can be expected, as profits and outputs were rising, so were the number of fatal accidents. This all came to a head on Tuesday, May the 13th, 2014. Exactly how the accident started is not completely clear. According to the government, it was an explosion caused by a faulty electrical power transformer, but the company running the mine disputed this, and they claim that the source of the fire still hasn't been fully determined. What we do know is that at around 2:40 PM, as they were blasting away an area that was close to the entrance ramp, a fire broke out and a section of the roof collapsed. There were discarded pieces of wood very close to the fire, and these quickly ignited and the fire began to spread. To explain the full horror of this situation, you have to know a little bit about the layout of the mine. From the surface, workers descended into the mine by walking down a steep ramp, which would then split off at various junctions into different galleries for mining coal. The mine's deepest point was 450 meters underground, but the fire broke out at about 150 meters, which was fairly close to the entrance and right next to the ramp. Tragically, there were 787 people underground at the time of the fire, and the vast majority of them were deeper down in the mines than where the fire had started, which meant that their only path out of there was blocked. And they found themselves trapped in confined tunnels, with smoke slowly starting to fill the mine. At the first signs of the fire, most of the workers made their way deeper into the mine. This was a safety protocol. As part of their safety training, in the event of a fire, workers had been instructed to head deeper into the mines and wait for clean air to be pumped in, but as we'll see later, this turned out to be extremely bad advice. Some miners went against this protocol. It turns out that they were the lucky ones. Miners like Ende. He had just finished his shift and was heading for the exits when he heard the explosion. He and a group of other miners were ordered by their managers to go back deeper into the mines. In an interview, Bichak recounted that he'd ended up stranded about a kilometre underground with 150 other miners. At first they huddled together and they started to put on gas masks, but they soon discovered that there weren't enough masks for everybody to wear. They hoped that a rescue team would find them soon, but as the minutes stretched on and the air started to become unbreathable, the trapped miners started to become extremely anxious. Bichak and his close friend decided that they weren't going to wait around for death, and they tried to make their way to the exits. The tunnels that they had to traverse were very narrow and steep, with ceilings so low that the men couldn't even stand up properly. The thick smoke was choking, and it dramatically reduced visibility, which made their progress painfully slow. Every few meters, Bichak and his friend took turns slapping each other just to stay conscious. Later in an interview he would say, "I told my friend, I can't go on, leave me here, I'm going to die." Luckily for him, his friend refused to leave him behind. It turns out they were incredibly lucky. By the time they reached the entrance ramp, the power had been partially restored by emergency crews on the surface, and both men managed to make it out of the mine. By the time they reached the exit, they were lapsing in and out of consciousness. Out of the 150 men that Bichak had been with, only 15 made it out of there alive. "I'm not going to be a miner anymore," he told his interviewers. "God gave me a chance, and now I'm done." In other parts of the mine, other groups of men headed towards areas that they thought would be safe and waited for rescue. A lot of them found places that seemed to be safe from the smoke, but what they didn't realise is that there was an even more deadly threat spreading through the tunnels: carbon monoxide gas. Carbon monoxide is entirely invisible, as well as being odourless and tasteless, but exposure to it can kill you in minutes. There were carbon monoxide detectors in the mine, and these should have served as an early warning system, but due to the cost-cutting measures, they hadn't been properly calibrated, or they just simply didn't work. There was also a ventilation system. This was designed to pump fresh air into the mine. In theory, this system should have started to draw out the carbon monoxide gas and the smoke, but as you can probably guess, the ventilation system was badly neglected. Since the system had been installed many years ago, it had never been upgraded or adapted to meet the requirements of the rapidly expanding mine tunnels, and it hadn't been properly maintained at all. In fact, the ventilation system didn't just fail to draw away the toxic gases and smoke, but it actually made things much worse. Instead of clearing the tunnels, it just circulated the gases around, effectively turning the tunnels into deadly gas chambers. Around an hour after the fire first started, some of the miners started to feel dizzy and fainted, succumbing to the smoke and carbon monoxide poisoning. It was around this time that the mine's executive management staff entered, and they tried to reach the location of the fire to assess the damage, but they were pushed back by the intense smoke. Now, not all the miners were just stranded in the tunnels. There were a number of safety chambers located around the mine. These are rooms where, in the event of an emergency, miners can seek refuge away from the danger. These rooms are supposed to be stocked with enough food, water and oxygen to last them about 20 days, depending on how many people are in there, I suppose. 142 men managed to cram themselves into one of these chambers, but as the ventilation system was completely screwed, smoke soon began to pour in. They began to put on gas masks, but again there weren't enough masks for everybody. One man named Ijon Chichikli would later say in an interview, "Smoke was everywhere. This safe haven had protected us for an hour and a half before the smoke started to get in. We fainted." He had been lucky enough to get a gas mask, but the equipment was very old and not exactly well made. He would later remark, "They said that these masks would last for 45 minutes, but we didn't even make it for half an hour." Soon the first of his colleagues, those who hadn't got a gas mask, began convulsing and fainting. Not long after, John lost consciousness too. Sometime later, John started to regain consciousness and he opened his eyes. I had a splitting headache and my legs were numb, he said. One of my friends was shaking violently. John found himself surrounded by miners lying motionless on the floor. Only 4 other people were conscious. Together they managed to locate a stream of fresh air and they began dragging the bodies of the other miners towards it, hoping that there was still a chance to save them. Soon after that, a rescue team found them, but there were over 100 men who were just unconscious on the floor at that point. The rescue team weren't equipped to deal with them all. It was only those miners who were able to regain consciousness enough to walk who were rushed out. The others just had to be abandoned where they lay. The sight that greeted John and his colleagues outside the chamber was even worse than inside. The tunnels were filled with corpses everywhere they looked. When they saw such a large number of bodies, some of the men started to panic and they desperately tried to push past everyone else to escape the dark tunnels. 39 of my friends survived, 100 perished. Those who were pushing people forward were dying. We were so dizzy we couldn't see ahead of us. We only reached the outside by walking over corpses. There were 4 rescue teams that entered the tunnels to search for trapped miners. Each of them saw horrific things, narrow tunnels crammed with piles of dead men. One of the rescuers found a note clenched in the fist of a dead miner which read, "Please give me your blessings, son." One of the rescue teams managed to locate a safety chamber, but when they opened the door, instead of finding a well-equipped safe room stocked with supplies, they discovered a bare room just 5 meters square, and it contained the corpses of 14 men stacked on top of each other. These men had entered the room hoping to find some gas masks, but instead they only found a few oxygen cylinders, and these were equipped with extremely out-of-date respirators. In an effort to survive, the men had shared the oxygen by passing the respirators between them. Unfortunately, they'd ran out of oxygen way before the rescue team got to them, and they died from smoke and carbon monoxide inhalation. Another miner, a man named Murat Yokas, had decided to seek refuge in an air chamber. In the air chamber, he found 100 men crammed into an area of 300 square meters. The supervisors instructed them to stay put and wait for the rescuers. Then smoke began seeping into the chamber. Despite this, the men remained calm. Yokas would later say, "Why would we panic? Everyone knew that we were going to die. We just accepted it." The miners around him began to lose consciousness. In front of my own eyes, I saw them struggling between life and death, he recalled. He tried to keep them awake, but more and more men around him began convulsing and others began to die, suffocating, choking. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Murat learned that another group of men located in a different part of the mine had all died from asphyxiation. He decided to take fate into his own hands, and he disobeyed his supervisor's orders. I took the oxygen mask that I hadn't used, and I started to walk. When I looked back, I saw many of my friends on the ground. I had to step on the bodies of my friends to escape. I had to trample on them. Before he managed to make it to the exit, Yokas collapsed and fell unconscious. Luckily, he was later found by a rescue crew and carried out of the mine. Muzaffesh Artas was working with around 200 other men in the deepest part of the mine, and they didn't hear the explosion at first, but they soon noticed smoke billowing down the main ramp. The men tried to escape from the smoke by moving from one area to another. Artas would later say, "We headed away from the smoke, towards the area where the coal is dynamited. The smoke followed us. We moved further and further away, as far as we could go, but only 6 of us survived. I saw dead bodies everywhere, on the ground, on the conveyor belts. Some miners had tried to use the belts to escape. The search and rescue operation continued for 4 days, and the fire was eventually extinguished. The official death toll was reported as 301 people, but some miners dispute this number, claiming that many people were working off the books and so their deaths weren't officially recorded. One local miner would later say, "We think the number is way higher. We think it's many more." The company didn't want to say how many miners really died. So many miners died that they ran out of space at the local mortuaries. They had to put miners in cold storage at a fruit company. The tragedy triggered widespread anger and protests around Turkey. At various locations around the country there were mass protests, and many of them were met with tear gas and water cannons from the police. The mood in Soma and neighbouring villages was grim. This was a mining village. Everybody either worked down the mine or worked selling coal. Nearly every single family there had lost somebody in the disaster. They even had to build additional cemeteries just to bury all of the dead. This had been the worst mining disaster in the country's history. Prime Minister Erdogan visited Soma to address their concerns and to reassure the population that justice would be served. During his speech, he suggested that these kind of accidents were an inevitable part of the mining industry, and whilst this statement might hold some truth, it was viewed as being completely tone deaf, and it only intensified the public's fury. Many people criticised the government's close ties with mining tycoons and for not enforcing the safety standards correctly. The mine's general manager, Ramazan Doğru, received a prison sentence of 22 years. The operations director, Akin Çelik, received 18 years in prison. There were also 8 high-level managers who were arrested. An investigation was carried out and a report was produced. The report revealed an alarming number of safety violations, including inconsistent safety records and malfunctioning equipment. The inspectors found that the carbon monoxide readings fluctuated and the temperatures had been excessively high just before the accident, yet nothing was done about it. Most of the safety records had been fabricated. In some cases, it was just a copy of the previous week's records, and this had been going on for years. Of the numerous gas and carbon monoxide sensors that had been installed, almost all of them were broken, and those that were still usable hadn't been calibrated properly, so they were pretty much useless anyway. The tragedy highlighted not only the systematic failures in the workings of the mine, but also showed the dire circumstances for the miners themselves. Despite the terrible working conditions, they didn't really have any other choice than to work there. One survivor would later say in an interview, "We cannot do anything else. There's no farming here, no companies, no other jobs." And so, despite the trauma of what had happened to them, many of the miners had no choice but to return to this line of work. So, thank you for watching the video. I hope you found it interesting. And thanks again to Efe Idol for suggesting it. Apologies for my terrible pronunciation of Turkish names throughout this video. Thank you also to the patrons. As always, the help is very much appreciated, so thank you. I'm currently moving house, so if videos are a bit slow to come out in the coming weeks, I've not disappeared or anything. I'm just moving all my stuff to a different place and getting set up there, so thank you for your patience in the meantime. Anyway, enough waffling. Here's some more videos you might enjoy. Check them out, and if you like the video, why not subscribe to the channel? Until next time, goodbye.